Hi, welcome to the VA Spotlight series, where we bring you insights from some of the most influential leaders and thinkers in the industry. Today, we are honored to have with us Conrad Da Cunha, a seasoned coach and mentor, an inclusive leader, and a strategic change expert with nearly 3 decades of experience in investment banking, capital markets, and treasury. Conrad, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Welcome to the VA Spotlight series.
Hi, Shruti. Thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to share this with you.
So, Conrad, you've held significant leadership roles in major financial institutions. What are some of the key lessons that you've learned about executive leadership and governance throughout your career?
Good first question. Let me tackle the leadership piece first, and maybe I'll come back to the governance point. I would actually say I learned about leadership earlier in life. I played rugby as a sport for my school, and a teacher made me a captain of the team, I think around 12 or 13. So I wasn't really taught how to lead then, but I was just given a role, which happens so often in the kind of corporate world. So I had to figure it out, and it's a tough sport. And so my first kind of leadership style, I would say, is leading by my actions, through example on the pitch. And then I learned how to motivate and get the best out of others with communication. And ultimately, my belief is in order to lead, you have to be inclusive of everyone and kind of build a team spirit and a kind of shared culture first, which is super important. So I'm going to learn that early on. And I would say another key leadership lesson which I was fortunate to learn was from how I was brought up, and how I saw my parents acting and behaving around others. They're very much giving to the community and putting others first, which is very much the Goan way. And that kind of empathy and what we'd call servant leadership, or putting team or community first, is again another leadership style which I was brought up with. And ultimately every business is a people business, and so that's been a really good learning that I've taken into my career, or those kind of early lessons if I was to reflect back. The other thing I guess to point out is that leadership can be at every level. It doesn't just have to come from the executive top down. For me, you have leaders at all levels. So constantly learning as to different styles, different situations, be it crisis or change or COVID pandemic. So for me, leadership is constantly evolving. It's never a destination, it's that journey. And so you have to have the kind of growth mindset to always want to improve and adapt. And so a lot of lessons along the way, I would say, in my kind of 25, 30 years history. And really anyone can be a leader, it can be taught and learnt. And now as an executive, I would say what's really served me well is leading with authenticity, integrity and kindness, and empowering those around me. So, for me, good leaders create other leaders, and then the outcomes take care of itself. So a lot of learning, and I'll continue to learn in that respect. In terms of governance, for me, it's kind of simple. I found that transparency, integrity, accountability are just crucial to manage risks in anything. And so to build a long-lasting, sustainable business, good governance is at the heart of that. And you need right systems, practices, open dialogue with your people, and you need diversity of thought around the table to have robust decision making. And then you can kind of manage that risk reward, which is in everything that we do, be it business or life. So that's probably how I'd answer that question.
Thanks, Conrad. Strategic business transformations is also one of your specialities. So how do you approach leading an organization through periods of significant change, particularly during crisis?
Another good question. So firstly, for me, change is constant and it's such an important factor, an aspect of leadership these days, especially in today's world with full of uncertainty and volatility in any industry. So you really need to know how to manage change, and with that is a calmness and a clarity of communication. I'd say you need to be able to make decisions and be transparent with it. Why? Because in order to align your people and stakeholders to a common goal, and then execute, you need to communicate. And maybe that's where a lot of leaders kind of fall down, but setting a vision and then communicating is at the heart of a lot of leadership, be it change or just general delivery and execution. And then I would say having the right governance for transformation. And by that, I mean, you need to have the right people in the room to understand the root problems in order to design the right solutions. And if you kind of try and do change in an ivory tower, it's never going to work. So having the right people, the smart people in the room and hearing what their views are is the right place to start any change. And then empowering people. So, if you do change onto others, it's a harder thing to achieve. Whereas if you make people part of the solution, it's a lot better in terms of fostering that culture of innovation and adaptability. Change is always hard, right? Behavioral change in particular is the hardest I've found. And so you really need to appeal to hearts and minds and understand people, understand your stakeholders who are impacted by change. And so it's not rocket science, I would say, but it takes real understanding of people at the heart of it and the why. Why are you doing change? And then communicating that in a clear and urgent way. And then crisis is very similar, but the communication needs to be more frequent, more transparent, and even more kind of critically at the heart of how you drive any movement during a crisis.
You've been a strong advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how do you integrate the DE&I initiatives into the fabric of an organization?
This is an age-old question, and it's, organizations are still working at this and getting it wrong, and some are getting it right. But for me, I've always had a passion for diversity, equity, inclusion, and advocated it, partly because of my own journey and experiences of being different and thinking differently and not seeing many like me at the top of the an organization or in the room when decisions are made. So for me, being an inclusive leader and being authentic, I made it a priority to embed those as part of DNA in the teams and businesses I worked in. And so it has to come from that. It can't be like an organization dictating it, as a tick box exercise. It needs to come from a genuine place and purpose. And that first question, I would say, of why. Why do you need DE&I in a workplace? And I think that often is missed to really articulate the purpose of it. And the reality is, it's not just the right thing to do for society to have your organizations represent your people as a whole, but through inclusive practices, all your people start to feel like they belong and share the accountability, the goals, and that loyalty starts to really get nurtured. And so, with diversity of thoughts and experience around a table, you start to get innovation, you reduce groupthink and get better risk management practices, and ultimately better decision making, which leads to business outcomes. And so really understanding your why for DE&I has to be kind of at the forefront of it, not just the tick box. And so setting that kind of clear, measurable goals and making it part of the everyday fabric, the DNA, through metrics, through performance at all levels, I think it's crucial to have. And I think the other aspect is, as a leader in particular, how do you create safe spaces for all, to have the open dialogue without any kind of repercussions, to have conflict in a safe way, and to have that education. Everyone's different, and so you need to kind of really understand people and make the unconscious biases conscious. And so I would say those are the kind of things I typically would do, but it comes from a place of genuine understanding need versus being told to do it.
Thank you so much. Creating and leading high-performing organizations is also a hallmark of your career. So, what are the key elements that contribute to building such teams?
So again, I think from my perspective, my learnings from be it sport or any walks of life, we take our unique experiences into leadership, and everyone has a slightly different definition of what does high performing mean. So just to kind of lay that out there, in my experience, I would say it hinges on three elements, which is culture, the talent, and how you execute. And what I mean by that is, as I mentioned earlier, you really need to, as a leader, kind of lead by example, first and foremost, and then those behaviors are what really are observed and then followed versus what you say. And so leaders need to kind of create that right environment for the right behaviors. And then you start to get a values-based, purpose-driven culture. And that starts to be the bedrock of any business or organization. So by a leader setting those standards of how you want to operate and developing character and culture with the team and the people, you start to have a kind of sense of identity. Once you do that, the outcomes start to take care of itself. I think a lot of people forget the culture element of it. They just kind of focus on the outcomes. Whereas good leaders create other leaders. And then you start to see, sustainability in your business. And that comes to my next point, talent. Hiring the right people or promoting the right people into the right seats. You need to understand, what you're trying to solve for, but understand your people and develop them. Create that kind of environment where learning is the norm. And so your people can flourish and really everyone rises. It's not a zero-sum game. It's all ships rise. And when you have good people all developing, you're going to get good outcomes. So I would say very much hire the right talent and develop your talent. And then how you execute. So, the sharing of a vision or goals so that everyone's on the same page. And that's important to also have the right environment. So you want an environment where, especially for high performance, where you can have challenge, you can have safe conflict, and that way you're going to get better outcomes. And so having a psychologically safe environment where there's curiosity and people aren't just going with what's been done for the last 10 years, you're always looking to improve in little things, is how you start to drive high performing standards. And I think that culture is really important as well, that honesty, authenticity, and safety in how people are allowed to be themselves and challenge.
Thanks, Conrad. In your experience as a trusted advisor, how do you challenge the status quo while maintaining a positive relationship with the leadership?
Yeah, good question. So I think to try and challenge the status quo whilst maintaining positive relationships, it's an art that requires very much emotional intelligence and a strategic way to communicate versus a one size fits all. It's for me, it's a one size fits one, and you really need to understand each person by actively listening to what they're saying, so you understand them, you understand their needs, and building relationships over time. It does take time, but it takes that approach to really understand somebody, why they're saying something or what's their motivation, and then you start to build trust. And that's the starting point versus coming in straight and just kind of directly challenging. I'd also say whenever I would bring a challenge, I'd offer solutions, or I'd kind of pose the challenge as a thought-provoking question. And that, again, depending on the stakeholder, understanding how they're going to react or what they really want is a way I would approach it. And then obviously, as I mentioned earlier, behavioral changes is one of the hardest things to do. So when you're challenging someone's kind of belief, potentially, you really have to appeal to both hearts and minds. And again, it comes down to understanding the person that you're speaking to or the group of people that you're kind of talking to in order to challenge in the right way. But also, they need to understand you and where you're coming from. So typically people would understand where I'm coming from if I'm challenging something. It's from a place of integrity or wanting to do the right thing for the firm, not for a particular agenda. And people understand that, they're more willing to listen and learn.
Thanks, very well said. And my last question, and I'm sure a lot of us would want to hear your perspectives on this as well. As a thought leader in leadership development, what do you believe are the emerging trends in leadership and career development that professionals should be aware of?
Great question. And again, I'll go back to the point of leadership really is unique to an individual. And I think a lot of people can read a book and go, right, this is how you be a leader. But actually, to be a leader, you really need to come from an authentic place. And in my experience, leadership can be a really lonely place. It's a pressured place, especially now when, there's a lot more asked of leaders. You have to look after your teams, your people, a mission delivery, the uncertainty of markets or volatility of a war, whatever the things may be. And then also obviously look after yourself and your family. So there's a lot going on for a leader. And then you're being asked to balance a lot of contradictory things. How can you be an empathetic leader but be decisive? How can you be inclusive but also be earnest in how you make tough decisions? And so there's a lot of contradictions. It can be overwhelming for leaders. And so that's, I've written a lot of articles on various leadership topics to challenge leadership's, thoughts on it and help. But having been there and seen it and done it, it's a tough place to be. And I think people being promoted into these slots in the first place need to have that constant development as a leader, because it's never static. It's that constant journey of leadership. So back to your earlier point around trends, I would say definitely things which are here and I think here to stay very much. If you look at generational purpose-driven leadership, the younger generations coming into the workforce now, they're really seeking meaning in their work, and not to say other generations weren't, but there's a very much a different understanding of new generations of what they're wanting out of a job, out of a career, out of the people they work with. And I think if a leader can articulate a compelling vision with empathy, with an understanding of what different generations are wanting, you have that edge. And how do you manage a team that's, of all generations or all diversity types? So having that purpose-driven, empathy-led leadership is super important, which I think is catching on, and it can be taught. So leaders just need to kind of continue to do that. Adaptive leadership, again, with so much uncertainty, crisis after crisis, leaders are having to evolve, but also adapt. So in a crisis, you may have to lead from the front, but then when you're developing others, you kind of need to lead from behind and be that kind of servant leader in order to help develop other leaders. So being able to adapt for your business or for the particular situation and for your people is super important. And again, leaders need to have that right mindset, that it's not always the same tool from the toolbox that they have to go to. So how can they be proactive and flexible versus reactive to the situation? I would say, especially with technology, I think with the rise of AI and various kind of systems and applications, an understanding of that and keeping pace with it is as important for leadership. And how do you lead in a more technologically advanced state? So having that understanding, but then having the right people around you to do that. With that is constant learning and reskilling is, as I mentioned before, it's a people business. So developing emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence, super important, I think, as in terms of developing areas, especially for future leaders as well as leaders already at the top. If you aren't able to hold on to your talent or attract the right talent, you're not going to succeed. So understanding that in a global organization, you need to understand that. And obviously, not least, well-being and mental health. I think there's a growing recognition, obviously, since COVID, about the importance of employee well-being, which is great. I think leaders who prioritize this for not only themselves, but their people are likely to see a better long-term performance versus burnout. And again, with all the extra pressures on a leader these days, it's super important that that's not a byproduct, it's front and center, making sure that their well-being and that of their people is there. And I would say the other thing is, because leadership is asking more organizations asking more of less. And so leaders really need to surround themselves with trusted advisors and a network that they can lean on, because when it's a lonely place, when you're in a pressured environment and you can't talk to your boss and you can't talk to your teams, it's a hard place to be. And so having that right network and support is, I think, again, what a lot of organizations are doing, they're providing that to their leaders so that they can be as effective in a more sustainable way. So I would say those are the kind of trends I'm seeing. And I would say that with leadership in particular, experience matters. And so when promoting future leaders, having more constant training and coaching, mentoring is super important in that.
Thank you, Conrad, for sharing your valuable insights and experiences with us today. To our viewers, thank you for joining us on the episode of Spotlight series. Stay tuned for more in-depth discussions with leaders who are shaping the future of business and leadership. Until next time, keep striving for excellence, and remember, great leadership begins with empathy and vision.